Hey, welcome to an episode of Wing Zero Duality. On this episode, we ask ourselves whether there is relationship without the image making process. And so we're not asking ourselves what is healthy versus toxic relationship. We're not asking ourselves what is right relationship versus wrong relationship. We're not talking about good and bad relationship. We're not asking ourselves whether certain kinds of relationships can ever be. We're not asking ourselves the myriad of other considerations that can be specified as to relationship. But rather, we're asking ourselves whether there is relationship in general without the image making process. And perhaps first we have to ask ourselves, why ask this question? Perhaps it is because on a day-to-day basis, the human being may find itself in great difficulty surrounding relationship, intimate or otherwise. Relationships which are defined by the image-making process. One can imagine the myriad of ways in which the human being relates to oneself and to one another. Roles, positions, etc., etc. And the difficulties which arise as to relationship is a question which is common to most people, is it not? One may find oneself in relationship which causes difficulty, or confusion, or frustration, or all sorts of difficulties that can be defined by the image-making process itself. So, we see that the image-making process is also common to all of mankind, is it not? The capacity to observe, record, and store knowledge, memory, and experience. And so then, the assignment of roles derives accordingly. And we can use the example perhaps of husband and wife. Now, husband and wife are terms which do not exist naturally in nature. Husband and wife are conceptualizations of thought of which memory stores, records, and relays back. And so one may begin to formulate an image as to what correlates with the designated role. And in such image making, then, there is friction. Friction between reality, meaning all of that which is tied inherently to nature, to physical surrounding, and the image of which one conjures, reiterates, fills the mental space with. And so there is a conflict and there is a discrepancy between the image, which is static, which is born of the past, and the reality, which is immediate, which may not align with the image one conjures. And so, then, what is there to relationship without the image-making process? We can take, for example, the story of Metal Gear Solid, in which a peculiar predicament arises, one which may touch upon the question as to whether there is relationship without the image-making process. In Metal Gear Solid, there is 3 clones of one human being. And each of these 3 clones carry a different personality, present themselves differently. And in comparison to one another, they form a pattern, a shade of personality between this and that. And the sort of predicament of which these 3 cloned characters find themselves in. This allows for the sort of observation, the sort of attention, the sort of attention which is like a fire that burns away the static of the image-making process. What was to happen if these characters were able to meet afresh, anew? Where is the conflict then between them? In Metal Gear Solid, the conflict, the outer conflict, is one which is presented as difficult to understand, difficult to pinpoint. Oftentimes, allegiances misaligned. Oftentimes, misalignments turn into allegiances. And so, the only place left to consider finding the root of the outer conflict is within. Whether these 3 characters could relate without the image-making process and see that, in general, the conflict which permeates outwardly begins within oneself. So, whether there is relationship without the image-making process also carries with it a certain sense of doubt. Because without knowledge, memory, and experience of oneself and one another, what path do relationships take? What way do relationships go? What limitation do relationships limit themselves to? And So, with such a great, vast difficulty and gap between what is the status quo of daily living for most people, perhaps nature provides a clue as to whether nature itself is limited, whether nature itself uses a particular way. And so, if the nature of things is eventually tied to the reality of impermanence, then such a quality of a pathless land, which are the grounds for relationship without the image-making process, is not so absurd. It's not so unfathomable. And it may be the question of which warring nations, warring ideologists, warring fundamentalists, warring family, friends, may ask themselves in order to, at an instant, through a quality not dependent on time or knowledge, be able to transform what is to a fundamental level, a level which is clarity, which is sanity, which is a bringing of its own order, its own intelligence.